The night had fallen heavy over the Spencer mansion, the kind of silence that presses against the windows and makes even the ticking of a clock sound intrusive. The air hung thick with the scent of jasmine from the gardens outside, drifting through the half-open curtains where Luna stood hidden in shadow. Her pulse raced unevenly, her body frozen between dread and longing. Through the narrow slit between the drapes, she could see Will sitting in the armchair by the fireplace, a soft amber light flickering over his face as he cradled the infant in his arms. The tenderness in his touch tore through her composure like a blade. He rocked the baby gently, humming under his breath, unaware that every note was reopening a wound that Luna had tried for months to seal. The child's name, Hope, was embroidered on the tiny blanket. It was cruelly fitting, because hope was precisely what Luna had lost the day she left that baby behind, believing that doing so would save them both. Now, standing in the home she once knew so intimately, Luna felt her soul divide. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to vanish before Will could see her and hate her all over again. But the sight of that baby, her baby, anchored her to the spot. Her breath trembled in the still air. The room, once a sanctuary of elegance and comfort, seemed to shift before her eyes, every polished surface and framed photograph mocking her absence from the life she had forfeited. Will's laughter once filled these halls. Now there was only the faint coo of an infant and the muted crackle of burning wood. Luna pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle the sob rising in her chest, but emotion, fierce and uncontainable, broke through. As Will rose to his feet, adjusting the blanket around the small body, Luna's restraint shattered. The sound of her heels against the marble floor betrayed her. She stepped into the light, tears streaking her cheeks, her voice quivering through the quiet like a confession she had carried too long. "Will," she breathed, "she's ours." The words seemed to fracture the air. Will froze. His head snapped toward her, eyes widening with disbelief so pure it seemed to stop time itself. The glass bottle of milk slipped from his hand, shattering across the tiles, the white liquid pooling like spilt innocence. Hope stirred, whimpering, sensing the turmoil that had suddenly filled the room. For a moment neither moved. The firelight flickered across Will's face, revealing shock, anger, and something far deeper, a recognition he couldn't yet bear to name. Luna's knees weakened, her body folding into the weight of her guilt. She saw the tremor in Will's jaw, the way his fingers clenched protectively around the baby's blanket. In that instant, every decision she had made, every lie, every sacrifice, came crashing down. She had thought she was protecting him from scandal, from the ruthless world that devours weakness. But standing here, she saw the truth. She had not saved him. She had condemned him to a loneliness he never deserved. Will's voice broke the silence, hoarse and unsteady, demanding an explanation that Luna could not yet give. The mansion, once a monument to their shared dreams, felt suffocatingly small. The portraits of ancestors on the walls seemed to watch their tragedy unfold, cold witnesses to a history repeating itself in cycles of pride and loss. Luna moved closer, reaching out as if touch could rewrite time, but Will stepped back, his eyes sharp with betrayal. The distance between them felt immeasurable, filled with years of unspoken pain. Yet beneath the fury in his gaze lay the flicker of an old love, stubborn and unwilling to die. Hope began to cry again, the sound slicing through the heavy air. Luna's instinct overpowered fear. She reached for the baby, her trembling hands brushing the soft edge of the blanket. Will hesitated, then reluctantly allowed her to cradle the child. The tiny warmth against Luna's chest broke her entirely. She felt the rhythmic heartbeat beneath her palm, a fragile reminder of all that had been stolen by circumstance and cowardice. Tears fell freely now, each one a confession, each one erasing a fragment of her carefully constructed facade. In her silence, memories surged like a tide she could no longer resist. The night she found out she was pregnant, the terror of what it meant, the threats whispered by those who wanted her gone. She remembered the choice she made, to disappear before the scandal consumed Will's future. He was destined for greatness, bound to inherit the Spencer fortune and legacy. A child born out of wedlock from a woman of questionable standing would have ruined everything. So she left. She left with a heart full of love and a lie heavy enough to drown her. But fate has a cruel rhythm. The child she abandoned was found, adopted by the very man she had sought to protect. The irony twisted through her like a knife. Will, believing the baby to be another's, had given her a home, a name, and a father's devotion. Luna had spent nights watching from afar, drawn to the house like a ghost unable to move on. She told herself she only wanted to be sure Hope was safe. Yet every visit chipped away at her resolve until tonight, when her heart could no longer bear the distance. Will's anger simmered just beneath the surface. He demanded to know how she could keep such a secret, how she could watch him fall in love with a child without telling him the truth. Luna struggled to breathe, her words tumbling out in fragments. Fear, manipulation, shame. There had been people who threatened her, powerful names tied to the Spencer empire who would do anything to protect appearances. Revealing the truth would have cost Will everything, including his reputation and his inheritance. She believed she was saving him from ruin, but in doing so, she destroyed the very bond that once defined them. The fire in the hearth flared, casting long shadows across the floor. Luna's reflection wavered in the glass of a family portrait, the image of a woman torn between survival and love. Will turned away, his body rigid, the muscles in his shoulders tense as he fought the tide of emotion. The betrayal cut deep, but even deeper was the realization that he had never truly stopped loving her. Every night spent staring at the empty space beside him had been a rehearsal for this pain. Now, faced with the truth, he could either forgive or be consumed by bitterness. Hope's cries softened, her tiny fingers curling around Luna's necklace, the same one Will had given her years ago, a delicate symbol of promises they once believed unbreakable. That small gesture undid him. The sight of mother and child together stirred something primal, something that defied logic. Will's defenses cracked. He sat down heavily on the couch, burying his face in his hands, while Luna, still holding Hope, stood trembling in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of secrets that could no longer stay buried. Time seemed to stretch, the house holding its breath. When Will finally looked up, his eyes were wet but steadier. The fury had ebbed, replaced by exhaustion and an ache too vast to name. He asked her, quietly, if she had ever intended to tell him. Luna could only shake her head, whispering that she had wanted to, countless times, but fear had silenced her. The mansion's silence swallowed her confession, yet the truth now lived between them, undeniable and alive. Outside, the wind rose, sweeping through the trees, rattling the windows as if echoing the storm inside their hearts. Luna moved closer again, this time with no words, only the desperate hope that proximity might heal what explanation could not. She placed Hope in his arms, and for a fleeting instant, the three of them formed a fragile circle, bound by pain, love, and the promise of something uncertain but real. Will's eyes searched Luna's face, and in them she saw the faint glimmer of forgiveness, a recognition that neither of them had escaped unscarred, that their sins had been born of love twisted by circumstance. Hope stirred between them, a living bridge between past and future. The mansion that once felt like a tomb now seemed to breathe again, its walls absorbing the quiet reconciliation unfolding in the soft light. Yet the peace was temporary, delicate as glass. Beyond these walls waited the world, the press, the whispers, the powerful hands that had once torn them apart. Will knew that claiming Luna and their child would invite scandal, that the Spencer name would once again be dragged through the mire of gossip. But as he looked at Hope's sleeping face, he realized that truth, however dangerous, was the only redemption left to them. Luna sensed it too. She knew their reunion would not erase the years of absence, the damage done. Still, in the flickering warmth of that fire, she dared to believe that forgiveness could bloom even in ruin. The mansion around them bore witness to their quiet defiance, to the rebirth of something both fragile and fierce. As dawn began to bleed into the horizon, pale light spilling across the ornate floor, Luna sat beside Will, the baby nestled safely between them. Neither spoke. Words were too small for what had been lost and found again. The silence that had once felt suffocating now wrapped around them like a fragile truce. For the first time in years, Luna allowed herself to breathe without guilt. She knew the battles ahead would be brutal, but in that fleeting morning calm, she understood that hope, no longer just a name, had finally come home. The sterile hum of machines filled the hospital room with an eerie rhythm, each mechanical beep counting down the final seconds of Poppy Nozawa's life. The curtains were half drawn, letting in a wash of moonlight that traced pale lines across her trembling hands. Her breath came shallow, uneven, as if her lungs could no longer bear the burden of the truth pressing to escape. When Will entered, summoned by a nurse's urgent call, he felt the world shift beneath him. Poppy, the woman who had always seemed indestructible in her fierce love for her daughter Luna, now looked impossibly fragile, her skin paper-thin, her eyes dimmed but still burning with that unmistakable willpower that had defined her. Will approached slowly, his pulse pounding against his ribs, unsure what to say to a woman who had once sworn to protect every secret she carried. She reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so close to death. "Will," she whispered, her voice a rasp of fading strength, "you must know the truth before I go." Her gaze flickered toward the small drawer by her bedside, where a nurse had placed a velvet pouch earlier that day. "The child you adopted, the little girl," her words fractured as she coughed violently, her body trembling from the effort. "She is not a stranger's daughter. She is your blood, your child with Luna." The world fell silent. Will stared at her, the words refusing to make sense. The air thickened, the room seeming to shrink until the only thing left was the sound of his own breath breaking apart. "That's not possible," he wanted to say, but his voice failed him. The color drained from his face as Poppy motioned weakly toward the pouch. He opened it with shaking hands and found a tiny silver bracelet inside, delicate and tarnished with time. The engraving was faint but unmistakable. Luna, followed by the date of birth that matched the baby's records exactly. His knees nearly gave out. The bracelet slipped through his fingers and hit the floor with a soft metallic chime that sounded louder than thunder. Every image of the child flashed through his mind, her smile, her cry, the way she reached for him without hesitation. The name he had chosen, Hope, now seemed like destiny's cruel joke. Poppy struggled to continue, desperate to make him understand before her strength left her completely. "Luna never told you," she said, her words fading into shallow breaths. She was scared. There were people, powerful people, who threatened to destroy everything if the truth came out. She thought giving up the baby was the only way to save you both. Tears welled in her fading eyes, shimmering like glass. "She begged me to protect her secret, but I can't die with this on my conscience. You deserve to know." The monitor beside her let out a warning tone as her pulse faltered. Will pressed her hand tighter, his own tears finally breaking free. "You're telling me the child I've been holding, feeding, calling mine in name only, she is mine?" His words trembled, torn between disbelief and dawning realization. Poppy managed a faint nod, her lips forming a small, exhausted smile as if relief itself was her last breath. "Take care of her," she whispered. "Both of them." Then the line went flat. The light in her eyes dimmed like a candle snuffed out by an unseen wind. Will remained there, frozen, his hand still clutching hers, the bracelet burning cold in his palm. The hallway outside was a blur of voices and footsteps, nurses rushing in and out, but he heard none of it. Inside, the world had gone utterly still. The truth hung heavy in the air, a specter too large to grasp. Every choice, every assumption of the last few months now lay in ruin. The child he had thought he'd rescued was, in fact, the embodiment of everything he'd lost, and everything he still loved. He remembered the day he first saw her at the orphanage, the quiet child with eyes too wise for her age, who had clung to his finger with a trust that melted him instantly. He had thought he was saving her from a loveless fate, unaware that he was reclaiming a piece of himself. Now, every heartbeat echoed with guilt and confusion. Why hadn't Luna told him? Why had she allowed him to live a lie while their daughter grew up in another's arms? He left the hospital like a man walking through fog. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and silver, distorted by the tears he didn't bother to wipe away. The bracelet weighed heavily in his pocket, as if it carried not just metal but memory. Every promise broken, every word left unsaid. He drove aimlessly through the sleeping city until dawn began to pale the sky. Only then did he find himself outside the gates of Luna's house, where the windows were dark and silent. Inside, Luna was asleep on the couch, a blanket tangled around her legs, exhaustion etched into her face. Will stood over her, the bracelet clutched tightly in his hand. He watched her breathe, the steady rhythm both comforting and infuriating. She looked peaceful, untouched by the storm that had torn through his world. But beneath that calm exterior, he knew there was guilt, an ocean of it. When she woke and saw him, confusion flashed across her eyes. Then she saw the bracelet. Her face drained of color. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Will didn't need to speak. His expression said it all. Luna's hands trembled as she reached for the object that had once bound mother to child. "Where did you?" she began, but he cut her off with a whisper sharper than any shout. "Your mother told me everything." Luna staggered back, her breath catching in her throat. The room seemed to tilt as she tried to steady herself against the weight of his words. "She wasn't supposed to," she began, but stopped, realizing the futility. Will's eyes, once warm and full of trust, were now cold, searching, demanding a truth she had buried too deep. "I thought I was saving you," she finally said, her voice raw. "You were being blackmailed. There were threats, well, against your career, your family, everything. They said if the truth about the baby came out, you'd lose it all. I couldn't let that happen. I gave her up so you wouldn't have to pay for my mistake." "Your mistake." His words trembled with restrained rage. "You call her a mistake?" The accusation cut her like a blade. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't try to defend herself. "I called it love," she said quietly. "Love twisted by fear." The room filled with silence again, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds creeping in through the windows. Will's fury began to ebb, replaced by something deeper, grief. He sank onto the couch, the bracelet glinting between his fingers. "All this time," he murmured, "I thought I was building a new life. I didn't realize I was living in the ruins of the old one." Luna knelt beside him, her voice trembling. "You were never supposed to find out this way. I wanted to tell you. I came close so many times. But then Hope was adopted, by you, and I thought it was fate giving us a second chance without the pain. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could both heal without reopening the wound. But lies don't heal," Will said, his tone low but heavy with meaning. "They only fester." She nodded, her tears falling freely now. "I know. And I'll carry that for the rest of my life." For a long time neither spoke. The first rays of morning light began to filter through the windows, turning the dust in the air into tiny sparks of gold. Will looked at her then, not the woman who had betrayed him, but the woman who had once made him believe in redemption. And somewhere in that look, something shifted. The anger, while still there, began to unravel, thread by thread, replaced by the aching truth that they were both victims of the same cruelty, fear, pride, and circumstance. He reached out, almost unconsciously, and placed the bracelet in her palm. "She'll need this one day," he said softly. "When she's old enough to understand." Luna's fingers closed around it, and for the first time in years, their hands touched without accusation or pretense. Hope stirred upstairs, her faint cry echoing through the house, a sound of life continuing, fragile but insistent. They both looked toward the staircase, and for a fleeting moment, the distance between them seemed to vanish. In the quiet aftermath of revelation and grief, there was something new, an unspoken promise, not of forgiveness yet, but of possibility. Outside, the city awakened. Inside, two people sat in the soft light of morning, haunted and humbled, holding between them a child who had unknowingly rewritten their destinies. In her small, perfect existence, there was pain and redemption intertwined, and perhaps the first fragile glimpse of peace that neither Will nor Luna had thought possible again.